Imagine expanding your team's abilities without adding headcount. At Element 451, AI assistants like admissions advisors and student success coaches work alongside your staff to deliver personalized experiences at scale, offer round the clock support, and uncover data driven insights. It's not just about doing more, it's about doing it smarter. Elevate your team with an AI workforce that delivers personalized, scalable, and impactful experiences across the student lifecycle. Learn more at element451.com. Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. I think that user-generated content on social media is one of the least leveraged tools that we have in our toolbox. I also think that it's probably one of the most important, but it can kind of be a pain to get set up. But I think that if you listen to my guest today, you might be convinced that this is something that you need to jump into. Because user-generated content is something that students are clamoring for. So this week on the show, I have Blake Mischley, who's the co-founder and CEO of MeetYourClass, which is a platform helping students build community from application through move-in. He's a recent graduate of the University of Michigan with a degree in computer science, and he's been building in the social media space since middle school, which I hate to say how old I probably was when he was in middle school. And I also have a guest on the show today, which is Camryn Simpson, who is the head of community at MeetYourClass. She leads marketing, community strategy, and partner engagement across a growing network of higher education institutions. She was the company's first employee and has helped shape both sides of the platform, building authentic peer-to-peer communities that students want to join while supporting institutional partners in tracking connections and community growth and embedding social communities more naturally into their enrollment strategies. I hope you enjoyed the show. You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast where marketing minds in higher ed come to pull back the curtain, spill a little tea, and talk honestly about what it takes to market in this industry. I'm Jaime Hunt, the founder of Solve Higher Ed, author of Heart Over Hype, and a former campus CMO who spent more than 2 decades navigating the weird, wonderful world of higher education marketing. This show is for the strategists, the storytellers, the change agents, and anyone who has ever tried to get Faculty Senate on board with a rebrand. Here we get candid about the challenges and share the ideas that are shaping the future of our field. Sound like your kind of conversation? Then let's get into it. I'm so happy to be here with Blake and Camryn from MeetYourClass. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
I'm so excited about this conversation. I got your 2025 College Decision Playbook, which dug into all kinds of things, guiding the decisions that students are making about college and how they make their choice about what college to attend. And I had so many questions about the data in this, and I would love to jump into that. But before we dig into that, can you tell us a little bit about the survey? Why did you do it? Who did you survey? What was your goal with this?
Really, at MeetYourClass, this is our first kind of full-scale student survey, and our goal of it was just to better understand the student journey. I recently graduated from college, so I'd like to think I'm still a bit in touch, but things are changing so rapidly that we wanted to understand across the different social platforms, enrollment choices, like how are students today deciding how they want to get to college. So we ended up surveying over 2,000 students across around 250 unique institutions, and breaking that down further, around 81% attended public institutions. So a bit of a skew. I think that the national average is mid-70s, but overall, this is just targeting at incoming college students, so students who were high school seniors and had already completed their decision and are going to give us a lot of great insights into like how did they actually end up at this point.
The audience for this was really, really interesting. And I think these large scale surveys that look across institutions are really, really helpful because they're not just looking at one population and why did you choose our school or not choose our school. I think there's so many great insights in here. So one of the things that I thought was so interesting in this survey was the finding that students are prioritizing selecting their major over choosing what they might consider their dream school. And I'm really curious about your perspectives on what that means for how institutions should structure and market their majors and their academic offerings.
Yeah. So I think that you're definitely not alone in that stat being, a little surprising to you. But I think for me, I think that this stat kind of highlights that students really aren't romanticizing the college process in the way that past generations did. So instead of starting with, oh, I really want to go to this school and I want to have this experience, they're starting with, what do I want to study? What kind of life do I want after college? And then they're looking at institutions like, how can I get there with this institution? So I think that that means that the marketing and, institution marketing really doesn't need to just speak to like how great an institution is. It needs to speak past that. And really be kind of like personal to the student to talk about their goals, their career path, their growth that they can have at the institution, because college is such a big like inflection point for students and that independence for them. So, marketing messaging, if it doesn't speak directly to them and their needs, it just won't land with them.
Yeah. And honestly, building on top of that, I was surprised myself. And then I thought back to when I went to college, I had decided my major before my school. I knew I'd wanted to do computer science. It was just a question of where at that point. And so we've asked this question at a lot of different conferences when we've given this presentation on this data, and everyone generally gets it wrong. We ask them to raise their hand, and 69% of students said they choose their major first before their school. And I think when you break that down into where you look at also some of the decision factors that we asked about in the survey, around 81% said career prospects were one of the top things that they cared about in their decision making process. So I think it's a lot more than just listing majors. Like Camryn said, it's about connecting the dots on like what is this going to get them to, and if they're looking at your school and another school's computer science program, like what's different about your program that's going to really help kind of push the needle over the edge to where now you've made the short list and can work your way up.
I love that idea of finding those differentiating factors that make your majors, because there's certain majors that exist at pretty much every school. And then how do you then say like, no, but you should go here? And I also think this really speaks to data that I've seen in the past about how when students look at websites, they're looking for major pages, but they don't just want like, to your point, hey, we have computer science. Cool, I'm going to go there. Like we have to do a better job, a more robust job. And you mentioned the outcomes. Do you think that's important to have on those major pages, like talking about some of the outcomes of the graduates of the programs and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think outcomes are important. I think it's also just a lot more than just listing, oh, our students get jobs. I think a lot of people just make that blanket statement. It's about being able to relate to those that kind of get jobs. So it's, maybe listing specific kind of places or stories on a student who found their passion for that major while at your institution. So I think just like to your point, it's more than just having a majors page, but it's also more than just listing the outcomes, because students are kind of seeing through that. And if they're looking at your major page, they're also looking at 5-10 other ones. So it's how can you stand out when they're looking at the same exact, potentially copy and paste.
Yeah, that 69% number is just huge. Like that's just a really big percentage of students who want to choose a school based on, or at least want their major to be represented at their school. I know my husband, who's probably going to be mad that I'm outing how old he is, but in the 90s, he was choosing between two schools and ended up choosing the one that had the major that he wanted to pursue. And, at the same time, I've talked to other people who chose a school and then were kind of disappointed when they were undecided and then it didn't have the major that they wanted when they got there. And then for me, I was like, the sky's kind of the limit. I want to go to a school that has every major so that I'm not, necessarily stuck with what I do, which ended up working out for me because my original major was biology and I ended up majoring in journalism. But to your point, biology is probably on just about every campus. Having the flexibility to shift into another major, I think was helpful. I also thought one statistic that was really interesting was that 92%, that's huge, 92% of students said that a strong sense of community makes them more likely to enroll. And that makes me think about vibes. And I've been on, I guess, college choice TikTok for a couple of months now, where students are posting like, here's all the schools I'm trying to decide between. And there are all of these rational factors, like I got this amount of scholarship here, or this one's really expensive, or, whatever. But almost every single one talked about the campus vibe. And would love to hear how you feel that marketers should communicate vibe and belonging and all of that before a student even gets to campus for like a campus tour or a campus visit.
Yeah. So I think that stat was also like really interesting, the 92%, and even off of that, 83% of them responded that campus vibe itself was a decision factor for them. I think a big thing for marketers is that you really can't fake that community and vibe for students. So it really isn't that polished marketing. It's going back to that more personal marketing, not like a polished campus tour or scripted testimonial, but like more showing the real stuff. So whether that's integrating, student generated content into your, social plan, those late night study sessions, the student orgs that students might want to join once they get to campus. I think that that's really critical. And vibe, I think where students are really searching for this vibe, and you kind of mentioned it, is in those social platforms that they're using. So I think that that's where places like Instagram and these social platforms become really critical, because that's where you can really, communicate that vibe. So my big thing is, I think if you treat your social media more like a community and less like an account that's just posting announcements and things at students, the campus vibe, it won't only be more effective, but it'll also better speak to the students that are searching for it.
Yeah. And honestly, just like underlining what Camryn said, it's 83% of students selected campus vibe as a decision-making factor. We just went over that 81% had career prospects as a decision-making factor. So it's even more important that according to the numbers, than the career prospect. So it's definitely something that, it's difficult to kind of define what a vibe is and how you describe it, but it does just come from like all of that authenticity that Camryn was really kind of hitting on.
So they really need to see that the campus is a place they're going to vibe with, because like you could have a campus like, say, Oberlin, which has a certain type of vibe, versus Virginia Tech, which is going to have another completely different type of vibe, versus MIT, versus William and Mary. I know I'm picking a lot here on the East Coast, but all schools have sort of their unique flavor. And so I think that student-generated authentic content helps students see what that flavor is at that school. Can you tell me a little bit more about user-generated content? Like, how important is that? I know it can be challenging for universities to try to get that content, but how important is that, do you think?
Yeah. I think it is, definitely important, especially as these social media platforms are becoming more search engines and search tools. But that being said, I know that it is hard to kind of have that user-generated content always ready to go on the account and stuff. But I think that it's less about looking for super polished and scripted content. So not about creating this whole program, which, would be great. But if you can't do that, there's also these students that you'll have students. There's bound to be some students that are posting on your campus, posting a photo, posting with their friends. Even if it's simple as just like reposting something like that, asking, hey, can we repost this to our page? Just so they can see like, oh, this isn't just an institution. Like there's people at this institution too. I think that that's like the big thing.
When you mentioned a few minutes ago that social platforms are really college search tools now, in the study, Instagram really topped that list ahead of even US News, and universities are spending literally millions of dollars a year to try to get their rankings up in US News and World Report. So the idea that, they're just going to Instagram where you're probably not investing very much at all in it, probably feels to the people listening to this like, well, dang, I'm putting my resources in the wrong spot. But I'm really curious if you have any recommendations for specific types of posts or stories to reach students on platforms like Instagram.
Yeah. No, I think I honestly just want to take a little bit of a step back on top of that as well. Is Camryn mentioned it and alluded, is that these platforms are becoming search engines. Like over a year ago at this point, TikTok changed their monetization policy to like prioritize content that would be searchable. I think in 2 days, on July 10th, TikTok, all content is going to be indexed on Google now. And so
Wow.
I think according to Adobe, over 50% of students now, or Gen Z, use social media as a search engine. So it's just thinking about creating that searchable content and where you can find ideas for those types of posts or stories. There's a lot of different tools out there. I know on TikTok, it's really easy. You can just look up, I think it's in the search bar, like creator search insights, and it's going to find you all like what are the trends of people looking for, where are there gaps in the content. I know when I wrote a blog post about the TikTok monetization and creator insights over a year ago, and when I was looking at the screenshots of our own Meet Your Class TikTok, we were kind of in the higher ed niche. We could see dorm tours for different universities that there was a lot of search traffic for, but that need wasn't being met. And so I think it's just utilizing the tools that are out there that are free on these platforms to find and make that content that students are looking for, and just kind of remembering in the same way that you're making your website so that students can search for, is just optimizing to be searchable on these new social media as they continue to grow in popularity as search tools.
Yeah. And I think just like going off of that and kind of like Instagram as a search tool and kind of like what kind of content are, the students searching for. I like to think about that students are really navigating the college decision process, almost how they would navigate a purchase. So like, Gen Z is the least likely generation to trust, polished marketing. So they're not just looking at reviews or the testimonials. So we're number 4 in US News or XYZ. They're actually looking for the people that are there or the people that are using the product. So I think that that's interesting, and just going back to that, very like authentic content. So as Blake mentioned, can find ideas in those, creator search tools, whether it's like day in the life, storm tours. There's definitely needs, and the students are searching for it. So it'll get in the right place, and it'll always live there, which is the great thing.
Well, when we as institutions invest so much money, I know there's listeners listening to this going, oh my God, like we spend so much money bringing in filmmakers to create these super polished videos and the super polished B-roll. And I mean, honestly, listeners, how are you using TikTok? Like, I'm not looking for, if I want to get a sense of whether this New Balance sneaker is right for me, I'm not going to New Balance's page. I'm looking at what other creators are saying about it. Well, what are people wearing the shoes with? Like, will this work for my style? Will this fit my aesthetic or whatever? I like deliberately skip New Balance's content for that. So this like user generated content, it gives this extra layer of credibility, I feel like. And, you talked about how Gen Z being more interested in that sort of informal, authentic content. And I'm curious about what advice you might give to schools who are really struggling with identifying and bringing those student voices into their content strategies.
I think like, obviously, like, if you can't hire a whole content team, and like you said, like, I don't think it needs to be the whole big ordeal. But if you empower students, like there are students that want to speak, they want to, talk and share their experiences. So if you kind of let them own a series or a channel and kind of give them the reins, because they're the students, they know. I mean, I think that institutions, like obviously, like everyone working at institutions knows the institution very well. But for the student, like they want the student experience. They don't want to hear, like you said, directly from the institution. So, it's about influence and not perfection. So you don't really need to over engineer it.
Oh, I love that. Don't over engineer it. I love that. The study found that 100%, like what study shows 100% of anything? 100% of students want to connect with others before enrolling, and 58% say it's most important to do that before committing. Like, that's a huge percentage of students that want to be connecting with, I'm assuming, other students on the campus, others who are considering it. What do you think that means for admissions and yield strategies?
I really think when it comes to the student journey, it's just auditing, like where in the process are students going to drop off, or is there going to be a gatekeep that doesn't let them take that next step forward with you? I think a lot of times universities might think like, oh, we already have something in place for community building or something in place for them to get involved with the orgs. But then you realize you need to have an EDU email to get into that. And it's like, well,
Mm.
they don't have that yet because they're still considering. And we know more than half of the students are wanting to connect and get involved before they commit. So it's just, if you're already alienating over half of your students from wanting to take another step forward, I think in higher ed, it's like sales, it's like these other industries. It's about touch points and how often can you be interacting and letting these students connect. And if you're potentially already stopping them from taking a step forward, it's just something to consider about your yield strategies and figuring out how can you potentially like remove a step so they can take another step forward with y'all.
What is one tactic you think admissions teams could implement today to create that sense of connection?
I think there's like a lot of different things, obviously. I think something unique that we've seen is just if you are orientation is kind of a moment when students really get more involved. Something unique I've seen is just as universities create these communities is letting those student orientation leaders kind of get involved and connect with students, but not with a script. The best way I've seen it is them. You wouldn't even notice that they're a current student because they're just interacting and making genuine kind of connections and friendships with the incoming students. And I think that's the best way because then students, once you get to college, you're having friends who are upperclassmen, underclassmen. So there's no reason to not start letting those connections build before they get to campus. So that's something unique I've seen outside of the many different ways of that you can help build those connections. But it's really just leveraging who do you have and can you just make them be authentic. Sounds like an oxymoron, but just like letting them be authentic is probably a better way to describe it.
Yeah. And I think another thing, and it's kind of something that I had mentioned earlier, but making those social spaces feel more like a community. So, and meeting students there, because these social media platforms aren't just for content for these students as well. Like they're also social spaces where students are, looking for connections, even past the college decision process. Their network is already in these social spaces. So if you can integrate into that, that helps them better, feel a part of your community and have your institution become a part of their community. So, showing up in those spaces, I think is really important. And again, you don't have to be everywhere, but if you pick a space and you do it well, I think that students are really just looking for that one, that community space that's important.
One of the things that we did when I was at Winston-Salem State was really leverage some of the student I want to say influencers, but I don't mean it the way that we think about influencers today. But like the SGA students and the Royal Court and stuff like that, and our really prominent alumni, people who are still super engaged. And when students would post on social media that they'd been accepted to the institution, they would get bombarded with, "We're so excited to have you join the Ramily," and if you have any questions, let me know, or you're gonna love it here, so that they feel like there's already, maybe a half dozen people reached out to me, and now I'm already feeling that connection to the institution. And it felt very organic to the institution because the campus was just so tight-knit and such a community that it came across very authentic, but it also gave students a sense of like what the vibe's going to be. If you want to be anonymous, this is not the place to go. Like this is not your vibe. But it took some of the pressure off of us because we also tried to reply to every single post about that and be like, "Yay, we're so happy for you. We can't wait to see you this fall." But to have the students, to have recent alumni, to have even parents of students, like, "My daughter goes there. You're going to love it." It gave it that extra validation, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that that's like perfect. And even the way that you described influencers, I mean, like those are really the real influencers on your campus. So they're kind of who students are looking for. Maybe they'll see someone like them fit into those different niches. So I love that. And even going off of that, I think we've seen, some of our partners in marketing, if you want to, even post just directly like, oh, like, drop your hometown or drop your major, things like that. Just like really easy ways for a student to, oh, I can easily comment, no, I'm planning to study psych. Then maybe they'll get, 5 other likes or some follows from another student that's studying psych there. So I just think making really easy ways to connect is great.
I love that. That makes me remember when I was at Radford and social media was still relatively new then. I'm very old. It was, Twitter had only been out for a couple of years at that time. And students would post like, are you from the 757? Or, like, where are you from in the state? Because most of the students were from Virginia. And then there'd be like these little, like, all in good faith, all in good fun battles between the area codes and stuff like that. And to your point, you get followers, you pick up likes, you pick up a sense of community. That's so, so helpful. I love that. I'm curious about your thoughts on what you think marketing and enrollment leaders should take from the study. And we're going to link it in the show notes when they start having cabinet level conversations about budget, recruitment, student success. What should they be thinking about in terms of shifting strategy based on this?
I think kind of looping back to this idea that students are wanting to and are already trying to meet each other before they get to campus, like 100%. Like that means like every single student is at least attempting to meet others. And if you're an institution that isn't providing that, that means that they're still trying. So I think that sends two different signals. One is that students want to connect, but also it's the other signal that you're not a part of that conversation. So that might mean it's not as good of an experience, or you don't know who is kind of in charge of that. And so you're missing out on another communications channel, another way to get data and better understand like what are your students caring about? Is it the major? Is it that it's their school and they're part of the not 69% of students? So I think it's just kind of understanding that they're more likely to stay enrolled if they have friends. I think 93% of the students reported that they're more likely to enroll if they have friends on campus. So it's just how can you set the stage to have just a great experience at college and letting them connect? And I think just enabling them through social media is a way that can really help them meet them on those platforms, but then still kind of let them connect organically in a platform they're familiar with.
Yeah. And I'll add just a little there. There are so many outside factors and, so much uncertainty in the higher ed space right now. But this is really like one thing that students are asking for. They're doing it. So as Blake mentioned, if you aren't a part of that or, you're missing out on that. And also they're doing it on their own. But that's like kind of an expectation that, can be met now. And this connection and the community can be measurable and scalable and really, affect these enrollment outcomes, especially when, 100% of students are doing it. So if you offer that space, that's going to be a differentiator for your institution.
I love that. Can you tell me a little bit more about Meet Your Class?
Yeah, for sure. So Meet Your Class, it really started because when I went to college, I found my roommate and friends through social media, through Instagram specifically. Yet when it came to tools that existed in higher ed, there was really not much that an institution could do that actually integrated and connected with the social media platforms that students were already on. And so really the thesis of Meet Your Class is, can we keep students on the platforms that they've been using their whole life? An example is if you go to a higher ed conference, there's always these third-party apps or that you download for the conference, but then you don't use after the conference. Like if I met you at a conference, I'm gonna connect with you on LinkedIn. So that's where we kind of see when it comes to Meet Your Class is letting students connect on the social apps that they're already going to use, build those followers, build those connections, and then on the back end, provide data to universities to help them really focus on the right students to ultimately drive enrollment outcomes from a student side, better experience side of helping them connect, but then of course on the back end, finding those right students that are maybe 50-50 or at risk.
What is one change you would recommend every admissions or marketing leader make based on the survey findings?
a big finding of the survey is that, the college decision process is very student-centered versus institution-centered. So the student is really, in the driver's seat of the process. So I think if you want to reframe, your social presence from here's who we are to here's what it feels like to be one of us, like I think that that's like a very big differentiator. That shift can really make, your content even more magnetic. It also like integrates your institution into their lives because students really don't want to be marketed to. I think that there's so much advertisements everywhere you look at, if they just see more marketing that they're like, oh my goodness, like it's just more of that. So I think that even goes to say that, the best campaign isn't always like the one with the most views or impressions or reach. Like it's the one that really made the difference to make students go like, oh, okay, like this is where I belong and I can see myself here.
I love the reframing it from being about the school to being about the student. I talk about that in my book. Like we talk about that on the podcast all the time. It's not about you. It's about the student.
Yeah, because it really is their own journey. Like, so I think like I don't want to say that it's like a self-centered journey, but it should be because they're building their future. Like I think like when I was doing my college decision journey, like I was also thinking about what comes next after the 4 years. And I think that students today are thinking about that even more.
Yeah. And I think even like when it comes to that content that is like that student-centered content, I really just do think like based on the survey results, we're seeing students using these social platforms to find this content. Not to sound like a broken record, but it's really just focusing on that evergreen content, especially if you're an institution. If you want bang for your buck, you want to go where students are looking. It also has the highest likelihood of being displayed to as many different people and prospective students as possible. And I know like even at Meet Your Class, we used to run like an ambassador program promoting like our student side of our platform like over 2 years ago. And we just we had an ambassador program that made dorm tour videos for different schools. Like we still get follows, comments, and likes on that content like 2 years later because we made the decision to make dorm tour videos like 2 years ago. So I think especially as we're seeing these shifts within social media becoming more prominent as search tools, as search engines, it's just sitting down, understanding like what's going to be searchable, what are students going to look up, and it's going to pay dividends over the next years if you can create that content.
I mean, the information's out there. Take advantage of it and leverage it to create community. I mean, that's basically the takeaway from the episode. This has been a great conversation. Again, listeners, the study is linked in the show notes. But where can people find you if they want to learn more or hear more about Meet Your Class?
For sure. We can, y'all are happy to reach out. The report's also hosted on colleges.meetyourclass.com. That is where kind of our university facing website is. You can learn more. MeetYourClass.com is just our student facing website if you want to see what the students see. We're always happy to connect on LinkedIn. We always love chatting and having conversations if people want to learn more.
Awesome. Well, and as always, listeners, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, JaimeHunt. You can also find me on my website at solvehighered.com or my book's website, which is heartoverhypebook.com. And thank you for listening to this episode, and let's go bust some silos. Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and contact drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.